Hi guys, plot twist movie recaps here. Today we will be recapping another thrilling movie. Before we start, please push the like and subscribe buttons. Remember, we only recap movies with plot twists in them. Let's get started. When a teenage girl falls prey to a satanic ritual, a detective and a psychoanalyst team up to uncover evidence and expose the cult. The movie begins in the year 1990, in Hoyer, Minnesota. A man, John Gray, is seen praying in a car outside a police station. A man calls him out and he signals him to come to his office. When the man, John, sits down and the deputy informs him that his daughter lives in a church with a reverend named Murray. The deputy shows John a paper and tells him that his daughter has signed it already. A man named Detective Bruce enters the room. He introduces himself. He drops a recorder near John and asks for his name and occupation. He is being interviewed about his daughter. John claims he has been praying, but he still doesn't believe that it is possible because he can't remember anything. He says he is sure of one thing. He says his daughter, Angela, never lies. John tells the detective that his daughter has been avoiding him. The detective moves toward John and asks him to take his hat off. John is going bald due to stress. The detective leaves the room saying that John confessed, but he doesn't remember committing the act. He says that this makes the case confusing. The detective says that John needs to see a psychologist and also meet Angela. The next day, the detective drives up to a house with some police officers. They see a crying woman holding a cat. She is Angela's grandmother, Mrs. Gray. The detective asks her if she knows anything about the case. She says that the reverend who was present told her about it, and when she asked her son, John, he flared up. The reverend suggests that Angela should stay at the church. Detective Bruce asks for permission to take a look around Angela's room. The room is spotless. He walks toward the shelf and looks at the family photograph. He hears a sound and looks out the window. He sees that it is the door of a workshop swinging open and shut that is making the sound. A police officer named George approaches him. The officer suggests that they should not enter the room without a warrant, but the detective replies that Mrs. Gray allowed him in. Then he asks for the son's whereabouts. George says that he left 2 years ago and he doesn't know where he is now. George tells the detective not to ask Mrs. Gray about the whereabouts of her grandson, as it is not a good time, but Detective Bruce ignores him and goes ahead to ask. He asks if the grandson is running away from his father, John. She answers that John held her hand last night and prayed. Then she looks down at her necklace with a cross on it. Later that night, the rise of people praying to Satan is mentioned. George, who claims to be close to the Gray family, insists that John cannot force himself on his 17-year-old daughter, Angela. The detective replies that he heard that Angela is a shy girl, and George says that he had seen her growing up and has also seen the way they live. He says that she has lost her mom and may be trying to run away from reality. Bruce doubts his theory that a 17-year-old girl would send her father to prison because she wants to change her life. The detective then agrees sarcastically. Back at the police station, the chief of police, Mr. Cleveland, asks for a report on John Gray. Kenneth Raines, who is a professor and a psychiatrist, says that John's mental state is normal. They can't find a reason for his sudden amnesia. The professor also tells him that John declined to have a lawyer, and it shows that he is not trying to protect himself. Detective Bruce mentions that John already confessed, but he doesn't remember what he did. They are speculating that he repressed his memories. He says a famous saying that the mind is a whole universe. He suggests using regressive hypnosis. Later, the detective quotes Angela's confession to John, stating how he had forced himself on her step by step. John is uneasy hearing this. The professor, who is in the room with them, asks the detective to reread it and tells John to concentrate. John is being hypnotized and he has a vision in his mind. He narrates it to them. The professor is confused about why John would use the word he. John says he sees another man trying to force himself on his daughter, but he assumes it is him. The professor says he must have let someone in, someone he knows. As John focuses on the face of the man, he finds himself taking pictures of the man as he is doing it. The man is George. The detective is shocked to hear this. He runs to find George and catches up with him in the parking lot. He informs him about it and tells him that they have pictures of him doing it. Bruce arrests George. Detective Bruce and Professor Raines leave the police station to meet with Angela so she can identify George as the suspect. Bruce says that he has suspected George since the beginning because he had been acting strangely. When they arrive at the church, they meet Angela. They inform her about the man in her room and the rituals that her father mentioned. He lays out photos for her to see and he asks if she can write them down. She is hesitant, but then she says she'll do it alone. They leave her to go alone and go to talk to the reverend. He tells them that he saw her one day at the church and she started crying suddenly. He says that God has spoken to him at that time. Later, Bruce reads the paper Angela had written. It described all the horrors she went through. There is a drawing of an upside-down cross too. He asks Angela who else was with her father. Angela anxiously points out George's photo. Bruce holds her hand to comfort her, but she pulls away and leaves the room in tears. The Reverend gives John a sheet of paper written by Angela to make him remember the details of the satanic ritual he did, and he leaves. Later that night, the chief of police watches a news report about satanic rituals at a bar. He calls Detective Bruce and tells him to turn on his TV and see the news about satanic rituals. Hours later, John, who is sleeping, jerks awake screaming. He is frightened about something he saw. The next day, the police officers hold a meeting about the case and the satanic rituals. One officer says he has read the book as he describes it as a pile of trash. Bruce tells them that the case is complicated and that they should take it seriously. After the meeting, in a conversation with Cleveland, Bruce speculates that he feels that the case is a part of something bigger. They are interrupted by an officer who informs them that they have the location of John's son who ran away. The detective and professor get on a plane to Pittsburgh to find Roy Gray. Roy lives in an abandoned building with a cat. They tell Roy about the case and recent happenings. Roy says that their father practices satanic rituals and he made their mom kill herself from his drinking problem. Bruce says that the report he saw says that their mom was killed in a car accident. Roy becomes confused and insists that it didn't happen. The professor suggests reviewing his memories with hypnosis to find the answers. They start and Roy describes that they are in his room and a bunch of people wearing black hoods surround the bed. He says that their faces are like witches. The professor urges him to describe what they are doing, but he is too scared and he breaks down. In the plane, Professor Raines tells Bruce that there is something different with his memories. He says that Roy was a child in his vision and he saw 6 people performing the ritual and there are 6 family members in their house. Bruce suspects the grandmother, Mrs. Rose. The police search her house later and she is not happy about it. Bruce tells her that he spoke to Roy and she is hiding the photos. She slaps him, claiming he is lying, and then runs into the house crying about it. Bruce is watching George answer questions using a lie detector when the chief comes up to him and hands him the FBI report on Satanists and the rituals. They believe it is something bigger. He receives a call and then he is shown at the hospital. The doctor says he wants to inspect Angela's mark. Bribe goes into the room alone. He comforts her and she decides to let him see the mark. She lifts her shirt and reveals the mark. It is an upside-down cross and it is on the left side of her stomach. She tells him that the cult will kill them both since she revealed the mark to him. While alone, Bruce plays the recording of Angela describing what happened during the ritual in the house. It was her grandmother dressed as a Satanist. He follows Angela's description and imagines the ordeal in detail. The workshop door Bruce noticed earlier is mentioned. He enters her dad's workshop. They force themselves on people and torture people in a cell. A woman gives everyone a drink while saying, "This is not happening, it's all a dream." They brought out a baby and they started stabbing it and then burned the remains of the baby on John's property. Bruce is absorbed in the vision and he feels that they are all staring at him. He runs outside to catch his breath. In the next meeting, a lot of police officers are involved in the case. Bruce notices Angela in the station and goes to her. She claims that someone is following her. Bruce tells her that the city was shocked by the news, so it might be ordinary people who are just staring at her. She tells him that someone was following her too right before her mother died. Bruce decides to get her statement and leaves to get his recorder. Later that night, Bruce drops Angela off at the church. She gives him a Bible and says it would protect him. When she leaves, Bruce slowly drives to the road where Angela claimed she was being watched while he plays her recording. Her mother told her that it is one of their tactics, to stare at people as a death threat. Sometimes, they would call in the middle of the night and hang up. That was a warning, an invitation to be one of them. Bruce is reading the book that he saw on TV when the light cuts off. He goes to his bed to sleep. He sees a light outside his room, then a man in a black hoodie grabs him from behind and covers his mouth. Another man comes in and injects something into his arm. He struggles to grab the telephone but his hand is tied to the bed. A lady in a red hood is brought by people in black hoods. They take off her hood and she forces herself on him while the people in the black hood start taking pictures. The lady turns into the grandmother, Rose Gray, with white eyes and no pupils. Bruce jumps and realizes that it was just a nightmare, but the lights come on and he sees the telephone hanging off the table. Bruce and the professor visit John in the prison where he hung up drawings of the devil on the walls. Bruce says that John is the devil and he urges him to confess to killing his wife. Then they go to visit Angela in the church with Rose. Angela cries and tells them that Rose does not remember anything during the ritual. Rose gets mad and grabs her hand but Bruce stops her. The professor shows them John's drawing of them stabbing the baby. Rose flares up saying she knows she will never kill a baby. The Reverend offers to take her home. Angela continues to cry and Bruce holds her hand. On the ride home, Rose looks at John's drawing. The Reverend tells her that they are up against the devil. Then she sees a picture with red eyes. That night, Bruce gets a call, assuming it is the chief. He answers but no one responds. He grabs his gun and locks the door. Meanwhile, Rose hears her cat meowing outside and goes to find it. She traces the sound to the workshop. When she points her flashlight above the cat, she sees another cat with red eyes just like John's drawing. She runs back into the house terrified and locks the door. She hears voices from the TV even though it is not on. She sees blood coming out from under the doors, hears the cries of a baby, and then jumps out from a window. The next morning, Bruce meets Angela. They are waiting for Rose to confess. She is now in the hospital. They both sit in front of her mother's grave, Emily Gray. Angela lays her head on Bruce's shoulder and they start kissing. They pull away when they realize what they are doing. Bruce glances back and sees that the Reverend has seen them. Bruce apologizes and leaves. Roy visits his grandmother in the hospital. He tells Bruce not to talk to his grandmother anymore. He says that she is delirious. He also adds that the professor is a fake psychiatrist and he insults the Reverend too and asks everyone to leave. Outside the hospital, the Reverend gives them a necklace with a cross. Bruce takes it and when the Reverend has left, the professor tells Bruce that he is scared and he is not using his head anymore. Before he leaves, Bruce sees a man in a hoodie staring at him, making him uncomfortable. When he gets home, he gets another phone call and no one answers. At the other end of the line, Angela is holding the receiver of a pay phone. He has another nightmare. One of the men in the hoodies appears to be George, then he is surrounded by the group and he hears a baby crying. He yells no and tries to run away but he sees himself covered in blood. The woman offers him a bowl of blood and tells him it is only a dream. He wakes up and finds himself pointing his gun in front of him. Later at a red light, he sees people staring at him and when he gets to the police station, he sees that George is now free. He is alarmed and points his gun at him. The chief and professor try to calm him down. They inform him that George had passed the polygraph test twice. The professor explained that they received Angela's medical report, showing that the mark was recent and self-inflicted. He also explains to Bruce that a lot of people are staring at him because of how tired he looks. The chief suggests that he should get some rest and forget about the case for a few days. The professor offers him a small pill and he puts it in his mouth. When he gets out of the office, he removes it from his mouth and throws it in the trash. Bruce plays the recording of his first interview with John while he drives. He doesn't notice that he is being trailed by a car. He goes to interview John again and he asks to know more about the family. John said it is about his son Roy. He says that his son is not straight and that was why he kicked him out of the house. He says that they are called sodomites. Bruce realizes that John is taking the blame for forcing himself on his daughter to hide the sins of his son from the church. John breaks down and starts crying. In a bat, Bruce tears his notes as he realizes that they are all worthless. Then he looks outside and sees a billboard with the picture of the woman who was handing out blood to drink. Then he goes to see the professor in his house and explains that the woman in the billboard was in his head. He says that they were fantasies induced by the police and the people. The professor asks if it is true about George. Bruce still believes that George is guilty. They argue about it and he leaves. When he gets home, he is attacked by two masked men. He manages to get his gun and he tells them to take off their masks. They are George and another officer. Bruce says he won't report this, but he wants to know what George knows. George insists that he told him everything that day in the car. Bruce goes to the church and tells the Reverend that he needs to see Angela as he has solved the case. She comes out in her nightgown. Bruce asks her if the Satanists forced her to eat the baby and she agrees to everything. He acts as if he is comparing her account to his notes. He shows them the empty notes and the Reverend is shocked. Angela asks him why he lied. Bruce explains that Angela does not love her family, she hates them and thinks they are a bunch of drunk losers. George admitted to Bruce that he and Angela had been sleeping together and he rejected her because he didn't want to run away with a minor. Then Angela decided to change her life. The Reverend insists that Angela is innocent. He says that the Lord has already spoken to him. Bruce sends him out and tells Angela that she wanted to get rid of her family and she went too far but now she can't stop. Angela threatens him that no one will believe him, especially when she tells everyone what he did in front of her mother's grave. Bruce leaves the church and tells the Reverend that he was right all along. Evil does exist. In the news, a TV reporter says that the police have no leads on the satanic ritual. The Reverend and Angela are shown on TV claiming they saw Satanists killing a baby. Roy and Rose are in the hospital. They see the news and ignore it. The movie ends as Bruce visits John in prison. He is confused about what he saw and what he didn't. Bruce explains that they saw what the police made them believe and it was all made up. John says he was drunk the entire time and they ruined his family. He says it is his fault Angela is the way she is now. He wants to plead guilty and take the blame. He says he is doing it for Angela and one day, she can realize it and stop hating him. Plot twist. It turns out that there was no satanic cult and no ritual was performed on Angela. She was never even raped. She hated her family and was trying to get rid of them. She had lost about everything. What do you think about this movie? Share your opinion with us in the comment section below. Please subscribe and turn on post notifications for our daily uploads. See you in the next videos and thanks for your support.